Three very positive presentations to conclude our final session, but it's now time for discussion. Comments from councillors who would like to speak. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Philip Waddy again. I've always felt that the RIBA's Part 3 exam is the gold standard. I've just come back from Malaysia on an RIBA trade mission, and everyone I spoke to was saying to me how they respected the RIBA Part 3 exam as the final sort of hurdle, if you like, to qualification. I've always also felt that it's incongruous that students from overseas can come to the UK and get onto the ARB register in a somewhat easier way than our own students. And so I can see that this proposal will ensure that we have a level playing field. I'm just worried that they're on a register, which means they can practice as architects. But that doesn't mean they've had the requisite professional training and they've taken the necessary exams, if you like, the Part 3 exams, to demonstrate their competence as practitioners. Which brings us back to a point that Jonathan mentioned earlier about the potential of a license to practice. So I think we're being asked to follow a European directive to align ourselves with Europe. I just think Europe was wrong.
Thank you. Any other councillors like to contribute on this subject? Yeah, let's have somebody who hasn't spoken. Elena, Tsolakis, and then Senator James.
I'm just wondering whether, if not having passed point 2, we're also covering point 5. They're not the same thing.
David?
No, I don't think they are, in the sense that we... Item 2 is obviously looking at the value of the first award. Item 2 is also talking about the principle of integration of all the curricular areas. I think, whilst I think all the 5 points are related, I don't think they're a duplication of each other. I think they're an extension of. There may be perceptions, and I think they'd be correct in saying that some of these are quite nuanced, but they are all separate points, which I think together, as Paul has rightly pointed out, need to be seen as a suite of proposals.
Thank you. Senator James.
Yes, this obviously does address an anomaly which has been existing for some years between the RBA standards and our registration because of the EU recommendations. And it does address this anomaly for EU architects when entering here receive registration while the English students don't because of Part 3. However, I'm worried, really, although Part 3 is going to be integrated within the total course, somehow I worry about that Part 3 is going to disappear, and because what would be the desire of English students to take the Part 3 if they can be already registered?
Thank you. Let's get a comment from Richard Parnaby, 2 rows back.
I think the point that was just made about point 2 being the same as point 5 is correct, but just for confirmation, could you say, if this is not voted for, what other qualification would be required to join the register?
I don't think I understand that question. I don't know if David does.
It was said just now that surely we've already voted, or you have already voted for point 2, which is the integrated 7-year course. You're now saying that the end of qualification, that qualification gives you access to the register. Mm-hmm. If council decided not to vote for this, what other qualification would people have to get onto the register? There must be something else that they would have to do if this is not the qualification that gets you onto the register.
I'm still not sure I understand the question, but I'm sure I will in time.
Can anybody else help?
Well, it's ARB who registered architects, not the RIBA. So in a sense, the answer could be the RIBA doesn't have to do anything at all, and the ARB will tell you how to get onto the register. I think that's actually really no different to the current situation. Let's take a student representative, and then I see Sue Ware, and then the lady in the black top.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification with regards to funding? So at the moment, as I see according to the Business Innovation and Skills Department, architecture is classified as an undergraduate degree, which means that you could get funding for the whole duration of your studies. If we do accept this recommendation leading to professional recognition, how is that going to affect the funding, and will it be available for the whole duration?
The 5-year funding would stay in place, plus there would be a fee payable at the point at which the examination of professional competence is undertaken. So in other words, the financial commitment that a student of architecture makes is exactly the same as it currently is.
Thank you. Sue Ware, the microphone is coming.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about to be or not to be part 3, as you might expect me to talk about. I think that's something that will sort itself out over the next few months or years of debate. And I do know where Alex Wright's coming from as a member of the ARB board, and being very much aware of the figures that we've been seeing about the entry to the register from EU qualified architects coming on, 800 new entrants last year, compared with 900 of our own, is quite a substantial number coming in. And when you look and analyse the figures, where they're coming from, and begin to speculate on how much experience or what their qualifications are, you do get a little bit worried. But really what I wanted to just ask for clarification was on a point about this actual recommendation, because it's the way it's drafted. Access to the Register of Architects and title Architect on graduation. I'd read the papers I received, and it says it is proposed that successfully graduating from the 7-year award framework is a proposed recommendation 2, and it talks about the 5 years plus 2 years, and then it talks about the 4 years plus 3 years. So I assume that this recommendation that you will all be voting for was about the 2 recommendations that have gone beforehand. But Alex Wright's statement threw me a bit. And it's 2 different things in a way. One thing, we are talking about voting, or you're talking about voting for a direct entrance onto the register after 5 years of purely academic education, which is the EU situation generally, or you're voting for the 2 new recommendations. And I don't know whether Roger might consider drafting something to clarify that in the actual recommendation statement, or whether the paragraph at the end of these papers is only representing part of the issue that we are supposed to be discussing.
Can I say something? I think the answer to your last question is the latter. I think that the last 2 paragraphs of the paper are only part of the picture. What we have to look at is the recommendation that's given. And as a member of council, I'd like to make a couple of comments. First of all, whatever course is validated by the RIBA depends on that course showing that it can do the job. So if courses promise an integrated scheme or promise work in offices as part of the course, if they can't deliver that, then the validation board will presumably not validate the course. So there will continue to be a huge range of different courses. The second thing is that what we're talking about here is, of course, a recommendation, if you like, to the ARB that when the RIBA is talking to the Department of Communities and Local Government and to the ARB, it's very important to know what the membership as a whole thinks. But we don't decide that. The ARB decides registration. RIBA qualifications for different RIBA standards, if you like, are a matter for us. So we decide who gets to be a chartered architect. And I would be very surprised indeed if the RIBA decided that the qualification as a chartered architect, and what we know as in practice, didn't require the Part 3. The Part 3 is something I personally examine or teach on in various universities, and it seems to me to be very important. What does worry me very greatly is I know from experience of people who've asked my advice that there are circumstances in which the UK discriminates against graduates of its own universities by comparison with graduates of universities elsewhere in Europe. And I'm qualified in Spain. I'm registered in Spain on the basis of my UK qualifications. And in some circumstances, the UK discriminates against graduates of UK universities who then want to go and register somewhere else in Europe on the basis of a UK qualification. And I know hard cases make bad law, but it seems to me that this is a case in which the way we do things isn't as sensible as it should be. And I hope that Council, and in fact everybody in the room, will support the way that we're thinking about it.
Right, there's a speaker there. And then Councillor George Oldham.
Zlatina Spasov on behalf of the Architecture Student Network. I just have some questions that I've been wondering about. In terms of cost, is this not good opportunity by integrating this Part 3 within the qualification period to reduce the overall cost of education by integrating this cost? Is it not something that we should be thinking about? Also in terms of content, by integrating the Part 3 content in those 7 years, or typically 7 years, then what will this substitute? Like what content will it substitute, or will it just make the already very intense curriculum even more intense by adding up this Part 3 content to what we're already studying? And then again, what about alternatives to students who don't necessarily want to register with our ARB, or those students who want to go back to their country and register there? Will they be offered an alternative curriculum or more cost-effective curriculum, or some other option?
I think that's one for Ros Barr, actually. Several questions in there.
Thanks. There was many questions. I think Alex and Ruth all have answered this already. In the next today is very important that we can get the support of Council to move forward with this integrated award. And to make that happen after today is actually is the beginning of a journey for RIBA education, for stakeholders, for practice, for students, and of course universities, because what has not been discussed and addressed, it's just been looking at the context just now, obviously taking on board the quality of the content that we're already delivering. And so this is not about watering down or dissolving or getting rid of anything, but it's about tightening up, and that will mean a massive review of the current RIBA validation procedures and criteria that we already have. So in order to look at the details of some of the questions you're asking, that is something that will happen in the next process, and that's something that we're all very much, I was going to say we are looking forward to it, but it's an incredibly important part of actually carrying this through. It's not an instant thing. The question about fees is something I am very passionate about. I employ Part 2 architects just now, I employ Part 1 architects just now, and I see the struggles that they face, the struggles that practice face, that Jane says, about devaluing what we offer as architects. So really, there's so many facets to this that we have to join up. The fee process, David probably can talk more about, but it's a complicated part to this story because it involves a sort of greater being. But that is something that the Education Board has been championing. Joe Parry, who's on the Education Department, has been lobbying behind the scenes to government about the issues that architecture students are facing within the fee process. So it's the beginning of this journey, but in no means is it about diluting or taking away any of the quality of what a UK education system is. And, you know, that's exemplary, and we want to make sure that that's protected.
Thank you. George Oldham. And then there are several more people, but if someone could get the microphone to the man in the barber top, if that's what it is. First George Oldham.
Thank you, Rob. I think those are very wise and very reassuring words, because I think it is in our hands in terms of validation to ensure that we have a proper professional base in terms of our learning and knowledge. I have taught Part 3, and I am very strongly in support of Part 3, but I think that we do have a valid alternative presented to us. And I think what swings me on this are the very salient points made by Richard Parnaby, and particularly by Alex Wright. We have, this year, 800 additional architects registered under ARB who have not taken Part 3. It's as simple as that. So we can't keep our heads in the sand. Whether ARB is relevant at all is another matter altogether. But now we need to look at what we need to do for our own students. And it is quite wrong that we should say to our own students, oh, you've got to do this, that, and the other, when you can waltz in from the continent and do elsewhere. I would advise any children of mine, if they were that young, to go to Holland or to go to Scandinavia or whatever and get some free education and come in here and be registered after 6 years.
Thank you very much. Jerry Lauder.
Lander, architect and Part 3 examiner. It's just a point of clarification, really, on the meaning of graduation. It may be a stupid question, but this gentleman over here thinks 7 years. Sue was talking about 5. In my mind, graduation is what you get after a degree, after 3 years. Can you just say what you actually mean by graduation?
Graduation at the point of completion of the entire programme of studies.
So why not call that an award? It seems a bit confusing to me, since you're talking about an integrated award.
Because there may be awards within the overall programme, as we discussed earlier about the facility for universities to offer bachelor's awards.
Okay, I'm going to take two more council contributions. John Assael.
I think it's quite important in the recommendation to clarify this point. I agree with a couple of the other speakers. Graduation to me means bachelor's degree. What we should be saying here is that access to the register, as long as ARB are happy with it, and I'm a member of ARB, access to register is fine if you do the integrated approach. But if somebody comes out of university with Part 2 without having done Part 3, I don't think they should have access to the register. So we've got to be clear about this. Are we saying that those that have access to the register either do Part 3 or do the integrated approach, or does it also include those who have just done postgrad? Because if it does, why would you do the integrated approach and Part 3?
David, do you want to comment on that? I think it's integrated approach. That's been what everybody's said, unless I've completely misunderstood the earlier remarks. And since there wouldn't be a Part 2 where you could withdraw from the integrated course, there wouldn't be anything for you to get onto the register. I mean, I think that's the position, is it not? Okay. Okay, there's another councillor. Yes, please.
I'm a little confused and concerned, Mr. President. Could I direct this question to Professor David Gloucester? When you say graduation, is it after the professional practice?
It's at the end of the entire academic programme, the entire integrated academic programme. Sorry, I keep trying to involuntarily put in quotation marks around integrated, because integrated in the sense that we've used it in the context of the review is the complete subsuming of parts 1, 2 and 3 into this typically 7-year framework. What we're talking about here, I totally pick up the point that a colleague, Jeremy, made about graduation, and I think it's a semantic inexactitude on our part. We're really talking about access to the Register of Architects and title of architect on completion of the academic programme. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, there's one on the left there. There are several people wearing black. There's a lady in glasses wearing black, and perhaps you'd like to go first. And then there's a lady with a scarf just on the aisle, a couple of rows down after you. Tell us who you are.
My name's Hannah Vowles. Hello, my name is Hannah Vowles. I'm the Deputy Head of Architecture at Birmingham. I'm the Chair of the Association of Architectural Educators. On this question here, I want to ask whether, if most of the schools of architecture will continue to offer the awards that they offer now, because not everybody's going to rush to Europe to register new awards, integrated awards of 7 years. It seems to me that this recommendation needs to say access to the Register of Architects and the title of architect on graduation from the 7-year integrated award, because otherwise it may imply that we could all suddenly offer the title of architect on graduation from our existing awards.
I think we took the wording on completion of the academic programme. That would take into account both the facility of a university to offer a first award and this subsequent award, whatever, after 10 years debate, we decide to call it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take a speaker here and then with the scarf. Yes, please.
Thank you. Anna Kulik from Scott Browning Architects. Basically, I have a question, because EU architects can get the qualifications for as a UK registration pretty much after the educational experience. And if this recommendation is voted positively, then UK students can gain their register pretty much after their education as well. But what happens to all of the other architects who are registered overseas? Because personally, I'm from Russia and I have over 8 years of educational experience. And I have 3 master's degrees, including Russian and Spanish, and actually UK one. And I'm still sitting right now in the Part 3 course in Bartlett and trying to gain my UK register through that. Yeah, basically, that's not really fair.
In the end, it's a matter for ARB, isn't it, David? For outside EU.
I mean, there is no really reason for people who are not lucky enough not to have a British or European passport to be like paying enormous amount of money just to sit the examination, when other ones can actually do it without any.
David, do you want to comment on this?
I mean, it's principally a question really relating to the operation of the ARB prescribed examination. So extremely relevant, but not specifically to these 5 recommendations we're discussing. Be very happy to discuss it individually.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Helen Taylor, also from Scott Brownrigg. What I wanted to say was really more of a plea than a question. Firstly, as practitioners, we make special efforts to support the students in our office. We do everything we can to support them financially, training, all sorts of things to get them particularly over their Part 3s, and we're very keen that they get their Part 3 qualifications when they're working with us, and we value the students in our office. At the moment, we're all very used to a very clear structure of Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. If we're looking to recruit students as part of our teams, we have an understanding of what level those students will be performing at. So the plea is really, I absolutely endorse the idea of an integrated approach. I endorse the idea of options for students. But please help us as practitioners to understand how best we can support those students at different stages of their careers, and particularly if they may be coming out and looking for professional experience at a whole range of stages within that 7 years. How can we best help them through? And is there some way that we can help them when there isn't a distinct Part 3 exam that they have to pass as a hurdle? So that's one request really going forward as you develop these ideas. Sorry, go on. The second thing, should I just say that my second request is really to do with integration in the bigger picture. I was really impressed by something Flora was saying earlier about architectural research. Again, that's something we put a lot of investment in as a practice, and we try our best to create connections with universities, and usually that tends to be through occasional opportunities for teaching, external examining, or through the students we employ. Is there any better ways, with all these fantastic schools of architecture in the room here now, that they can engage with us as practitioners more? We would absolutely be delighted if schools of architecture came and approached us and offered to do presentations about research they were doing, offered to send students in to present the projects they're working on. That would be absolutely brilliant. Can I just make a plea for that integration to be both ways moving forward?
I mean, they're all fantastic points, and thank you. And I know your practice was involved in our practice review when we invited practices in. As we have said, this is the beginning of a process to look at the structure of a new integrated system, and that will also have to come through council, as we've done today. And so it's a process that we're on, but we very much value the conversation with practice, and we will continue to do that, and obviously they will be passed on. Can I also say, going back to your point about Flora's point about research, is a discussion that we have quite a lot, many of us actually who have practices and who teach, and this sort of embodied sort of that practice is research, you know, and there's so much that we can give back. I think one of the most encouraging processes that I've been through at the RIBA, I've been on the validation panel for many, many years, but the RIBA now champion a mentoring system, which has been hugely successful and actually answers some of the questions that I've been rippling through, where students are actually in second year going out and having sort of 4 weeks, 6 weeks in different sizes of practice. It's not just the larger commercial practices that can accommodate this. This is sole practitioners, so every size of practice, and they're getting that exposure and range, which is really embedding them into what's actually going on in practice. So we want to encourage this more, and we will also need to make sure that RIBA, you know, chartered membership, that the practices that are involved are actually wedded into this idea.
Another councillor question.
I have noticed a difference between those students that, year-out students that are enrolled with RIBA Northwest and the good practice that's coming out of RIBA Northwest in terms of the guidance that they sent us as to practices, and also the fact that once they filled out their sheets after 3 months, you as a practice actually do see that feedback coming back to the practice. I did then have 2 students who were at a very well-known London university, and they were doing their Part 3. None of that information came. I never saw a sheet come back to us. Even they knew me, they had my email address. I never had any of that response coming back to me from that 3-month process. And I think the RIBA, we've got the good practice already enshrined up at RIBA Northwest. It's there and it's working. That should be part of the validation process to make sure that the schools of architecture are following the same rigorous approach that Northwest is setting.
Thank you. I feel we're probably moving towards, we'll take one more contribution, Mark Swinnerton, and then I'm going to hand over to Stephen.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, just on the getting more clarification, on this question of what do we mean by graduation. It's actually stated quite clearly in the memorandum that goes with this. It says, students successfully graduating from the 7-year award framework will have access to the title of architect in the UK Register of Architects. So I think what we've got to do is add the words graduation from the 7-year award framework, and then we know exactly what we're talking about. If that's not what we're talking about, then we certainly need to be told about that sharpish now. And given that what we've agreed earlier on today, that at the end of the professional period it will be assessed, that was the amendment proposed by Elspeth Clements and carried, what we'll have therefore as a result of this is something, as far as I can see, that's indistinguishable from what we have at the moment, which is that people do 5 years and then they probably do 2 years professional practice. Maybe they will have done some of that earlier on, but they will have done 2 years professional practice, and at the end of all that they will be, we think they should be admitted to the register and given the title of architect. So it doesn't seem to me there's any great, dramatic proposal here. But of course the point that one would have to make is that that is assuming that universities are going to be willing to defer for a year or maybe 2 years their students receiving the degree that they've actually been entitled to when they finish their full-time studies. And that, I think there's no reason to believe that would be the case at all. Universities graduate students and they want to give them pieces of paper, certificates with their degrees when they leave. So it seems to me that while there's nothing particularly controversial about what's being proposed here in this recommendation itself, nothing, as I say, nothing controversial about it, the idea that the universities are going to be willing to sit on those degree certificates for a year or two until the students have demonstrated their professional competence and that has been assessed, I think that's really pie in the sky.
Yes, I don't think that's what's being proposed. Let me say what I think is being proposed, because if I can understand it, I'm sure everyone else can, which is that you would graduate people in the normal way after their 3 years and they get their, whatever it is, their B.Arch. But actually, I suppose the better word would be the title of architecture on completion of typically the 7-year programme, including the professional and practical experience. I think that's what's being talked about. Probably a nomenclature tidy up is required to make that clear. Jane Duncan, have we got a mic?
Just a couple of final words. Well, from me anyway, you'll be pleased to hear. Firstly, I just wanted to say that I think what we've listened to today has been exemplar in the way that we've been doing a discussion, and that we've opened this council meeting to those people who are interested in what we're talking about. I have never been, in all my years at the RIBA, here listening to both council members, academics, students, I'm really happy to see students, and practitioners all in a room together, all really fighting and trying to work out a route forwards for our profession. So I think well done to you lot, but I did want to say thank you to Stephen and to his panel, because actually I think this is amazing. I think this is potentially a way that we could be thinking about a lot of subjects into the future, and I'm going to take a lot away today to think about into the future. But hopefully the main thing about today is that we're going to actually end up with a better profession, different routes into the profession. And really, I know this is, Ros, this is just the start of your work with David to move us forwards in terms of educating our students. So I'm going to say well done to that lot. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have the final recommendation, recommendation 5, but Roger, just a change of the words, please.
The words that I had written down was a rather simplified version, which simply adds the following words to the recommendation, and they say graduation from the complete academic programme, which seems to me to cover a number of eventualities, if people are happy with that. People with happy with that?
No, no.
Well, the alternative is the suggestion that was put forward, which is to simply take the words from the last page of the papers graduation from the 7-year award framework proposed in recommendation 2. That's rather more limited.
So, Honorary Secretary, can I sort of make a cheeky interruption? I do think if you use the word graduation, it's not what this panel or the Education Committee think about it. In the world out there, the word graduation means getting a degree, and no one's proposing that people on architecture courses shouldn't get a degree after 3 years if that's what they want to do and go off into the wider world. I think it's a problem putting in graduation. It would be incredibly confusing, and I think the word is completion of the full brackets typical 7-year programme. Or some such. I think it's completion is the point.
I think Paul's made a very wise comment there. So Roger, just so we're clear, so it's the revised words, please.
The completion of the academic course, the academic programme. The academic programme. I'll say again what I have understood.
Sorry. Can I bring to order, please?
I'll say again what I have understood. If I've got that wrong, and it sounds that I probably have, somebody will suggest some alternative words. But I was proposing to delete the word graduation so that and add completion, so that it says access to the Register of Architects and title of architects on completion of the academic programme. Will somebody propose an alternative wording?
So
The point of maybe confusion, or perhaps it's only me that's confused, is that if we refer specifically to recommendation 2, then the conclusion only applies to that integrated course, doesn't apply to anything else that we've been talking about all day. Is that the intention?
Kevin, can you make a proposal, please?
I understand that point, but the problem is in a transition period, and Hannah was talking about this before, when people on when the criteria came in, it takes people several years to move on to the new system. So unless we're more specific about completion of X, it could mean that people on the current format don't take part 3 and qualify. So we just need to be really careful about that.
I think bearing in mind that this is not the RIBA's decision, this is a recommendation that the RIBA will make to the ARB. So I think we can leave aside question of transitional periods because that would have to be worked out. It's a question of whether the recommendation from the RIBA...
Roger, John.
Recommendation here. We've been discussing today the integrated course. Integrated course means combining academic study with practical professional experience. So we can't have in here the conclusion, which is at the conclusion of academic study, because by definition that excludes professional practical experience. So we just say on completion of the integrated course. The integrated course will have both aspects.
Then the view of Council is not what I was saying. It is that it only applies to the integrated course in recommendation 2. In which case... Well, it does.
Please, can I have one at a time, please? We're all talking over one another. Roger, please.
I think then that the wording that sounds as though it would get a consensus, and we might need to think again in the context of other discussions in another council meeting, that access to the Register of Architects and title of architect on completion of the integrated course.
Are we all okay? Good. Right, well look, do you want to take, council members, do you want to take a vote on that, or do you want to move straight to the vote on that amended wording?
Let's just
move straight to the vote. Okay, so if you can just wait until it's up on screen so there's no ambiguity.
Successful completion. Successful. I thought we were. I thought it was all architects, but there are obviously lots of lawyers in the audience as well.
Okay, so council members, if you could vote now, please, as before. We only have 29, 30.
Some people have gone.
Okay, all right. That concludes the vote. Thank you.
30 to 1.
So, 30 council members accepted the recommendation with 1 not accepting. Okay. Right, well, just a few concluding remarks from me. I hope you would agree that I think this was a very, very and hugely significant day for both education and practice. Significant in many ways because of the nature of the subject matter of the education review. The decision was taken to hold our extra council meeting in the open, and I think from the feeling I get, I think that's been a success. At an earlier discussion on this matter at RIBA Council, I was reminded, and a presentation that David made, I was reminded of a quotation that Leslie Martin made at the Oxford Conference in 1958, which, if you recall, I made reference to in my introduction. And he said, "It is simply no good for the profession to complain about the standard of education when those who have become skilled practitioners feel unable to collaborate." And that really struck a resonance with me, and I recall when I came into office, one of the items on my agenda was to seek this closer relationship, a closer alliance between academia and practice. It's where I come from. I was really quite delighted then to support David and the Education Review, ROS, and the Education Review, which was underway, and it was something I particularly wanted to support. I think the approval of the 5 recommendations today really establishes a bedrock for an architectural education which is suited to the needs of a 21st century profession. But as David has said and Ros reiterated, today's discussion is in fact the beginning of the process. The next step is really to enter into discussions with SCOSA and the Schools of Architecture, and that will be undertaken this year. And then next year will be a review of criteria and validation, which will follow on. So I'm personally very pleased and delighted that Council has endorsed those recommendations. All really it needs for me to do is to, I want to thank Paul particularly for moderating the whole day, and of course all the speakers that have contributed to really quite an energised discussion. I want to reiterate my thank you to the Education Review Group, but I also want to thank you all for coming here today and for the very enlightened and very positive and constructive comments that you've made to our debate. So I now just want to simply hand back to Paul. You've got a little bit of housekeeping, Paul, I gather.
Voting sticks to the registration desk without fail. Thank you for inviting me to sort of moderate today. I had my briefing from David Gloucester. I must say, when he outlined this simple set of proposals, after about 15 minutes, my head was spinning, not just with the amount of information and detail and research that had gone into this whole programme, but also some of the implications of it, which I think have begun to sink in during the course of the day. One obvious one being, well, 7 is typical, but it might not be. It might be 6. Could be some financial implications there. Lots still to discuss. And as Ros Barr said, you know, this is the start of a journey, not the finish of it. I suppose the one thing that stuck in my mind, I love those comparisons between lawyers and architects and the way they get trained. And I'll tell you why it's easier to do legal training and why they take anybody. And the answer is because there are hundreds and thousands of lippy people who like arguing. There are very few who are going to be the designers who make the world around us, and they need to be encouraged and educated and nurtured, and long may they flourish. Thank you very much.